So as we pick up with Civil War Part 6, what we're going to find is this build-up, this lead-up to the finale of the Civil War event. Of course, we'll see that as this comic comes to a close, that we'll see that we're led to the very beginnings of this major confrontation between Captain America's side and Iron Man's side. But what we're also going to get is this explanation, a little bit of information in terms of how it was that this whole Civil War Superhuman Registration Act even started. That Congress didn't simply just arbitrarily say we should pass this bill, that there was a catalyst to passing this bill. There was someone who came along and said this bill should be passed or should be introduced to Congress so that it can pass. But what we see as we start this story is that we're at a shield base in Arizona. And at this shield base, we of course pick up with Hank Pym and Maria Hill. And what Hank Pym and Maria Hill are doing is analyzing these engineered superheroes, making sure that they're functioning the way that they were designed to do, to ensure that no further incidents like what happened with Thor take place. And what Hank Pym tells us here is that the superheroes, actions or the view of the superheroes has to be restored within the eyes of humanity, that people need to begin trusting superheroes again. And so having these superheroes, the ones who have been engineered, and to have them have fake identities, to make them seem as though they're normal people, will go towards allowing humanity to have its faith restored in superheroes. And that again, these are all going to be part of the big push. They're all going to be part of the 50-state initiative. And so again, with this story, this seems a little underhanded with regards to the actions of Hank Pym. Hank Pym and Maria Hill, of course, are basically telling us that they're going to trick humanity into believing that these engineered superheroes are actual people, and they're simply not going to tell humanity the truth. Now, whether or not this is something that will backfire is something we don't know at the moment, and again, it may never be explained to us. But as we continue with this story, we of course see that Hank Pym is called away by one of the SHIELD agents when he's informed that there's a problem with one of the superheroes that has been engineered. So of course we see that Hank Pym leaves Maria Hill to continue examining the superheroes that are currently functioning correctly. At this point, we transition to the Baxter Building with Reed Richards as he's continuing his work, his reprogramming on the cyborg version of Thor. And what Reed Richards is doing is he's conversing directly with Tony Stark. Now, of course, Tony Stark is currently outside of the Baxter Building, and they're just using a comm system in order to talk to one another. But of course, Tony Stark asks Reed Richards how the reprogramming is coming along. And Reed Richards says that they've been in surgery for quite some time. They've been working on this for quite some time. That, of course, that the reprogramming should keep this cyborg version of Thor from killing anybody else, but that the actions of this cyborg version of Thor in killing Bill Foster is, of course, something they're concerned about. But what he also does is he asks Tony Stark how everything's coming along on the street level in terms of the crime that's supposedly supposed to be going down. And what Tony Stark says is that the probability map that had been created by Reed Richards seems to be accurate, that crime statistics are at an all-time low, and that everything seems to be going in a much better direction. He also asked Reed Richards about his meeting with the president, and Reed Richards says that he specifically told the president he would only become part of the actual 50-state initiative when it launched if Johnny Storm and Susan Storm were being kept from any kind of prosecution. And of course, when Tony Stark asked Reed Richards what the president's response was, Reed Richards says the president gave him 12 immunities, which he can use for any individual. And of course, we know that 2 of those will most likely go to Johnny Storm and to Susan Storm. But as we continue with this story, we pick up again inside of the Baxter Building, but in a different part of the building. And what we learn here is that we're currently following the actions of Frank Castle. And Frank Castle is infiltrating the Baxter Building, but the way that he's doing it is very intriguing. What Frank Castle tells us is that the security system of the Baxter Building was designed by Reed Richards in such a way to where it would basically function in the same capacity as the immune system, in the sense that whenever the blue baubles or these blue spheres would determine, or detect something that's not supposed to be there, they would immediately attack. And so the suit that Frank Castle is currently wearing is something he had stolen from Tony Stark, which allows him to move through the security system without actually being detected. And so from here, we pick up with both Captain America and Frank Castle as the 2 of them are communicating back and forth. And Captain America says that, informs us that the whole reason for Frank Castle being here is that he's going to gain some information on prison complex number 42, which is of course the complex where the majority of superheroes and supervillains who are anti-registration are being housed in the negative zone. And Captain America wants the specific specifics. He wants the specifications on this prison complex. He wants to know how big it is. He wants to know how much room they have to move around, how it's accessed, all the information that Frank Castle can possibly get, which of course Frank Castle is successful in being able to get for Captain America. And so from here we transition to Atlantis with Susan Storm meeting with Namor the Submariner. And what she's doing here, or at least as is explained to us, is she's looking to gain the forces of Namor the Submariner for the team of Captain America. But Namor the Submariner is initially, I guess, a little arrogant here, but is also reluctant to assist Susan Storm here. And the reason why is because he feels insulted. He feels that the idea of Captain America sending an emissary rather than Captain America coming here himself is an insult, in the sense that if Captain America is going to ask for aid from the direct ruler of Atlantis, then Captain America himself, as the leader of the Secret Avengers, should be the one to be here and ask for that aid. But what he also tells Susan Storm is that he believes Susan Storm has an affection for him, that he's noticed for quite some time that she'd been looking at him in such a way to where it appeared as though she had an interest. Of course, Susan Storm says no, but Namor the Submariner says he can detect the vibrations of her beating heart in the water, and that her heart is beating faster than it should. Now, whether or not this is because she genuinely does have an interest in Namor the Submariner, or because he's simply just attributing her erratic heartbeat due to her nervousness as being a romantic interest in Namor the Submariner, is not something that's explicitly explained to us. But I would go as far as to say that given the relationship between Susan Storm and Reed Richards, as tenuous as it is at the moment, that it may very well be that she does or did have an interest in Namor the Submariner that she had never acted on, and of course doesn't intend to act on at this point in time. From here, we pick up with Captain America and the Secret Avengers once more, and of course we see that Captain America tells us that Namor the Submariner had turned down the offer of Captain America to extend aid to their forces. And so it seems as though, for the most part, the forces of Tony Stark and Reed Richards and S.H.I.E.L.D. vastly outnumber the forces of Captain America's team. But what we also see here is that Captain America is informing, or I guess speaking with the Secret Avengers, with Falcon and others, and telling them that that Frank Castle was able to gain information about Prison 42. He was able to get them the schematics for the building, and that what they're going to be basically doing is launching a campaign to free all of the captured superheroes and supervillains within the complex. What he tells us is that the initiative is going to begin moving in such a direction that it's going to launch basically in a very short amount of time, and so their window is constantly getting smaller and smaller for when they can actually jump into this opportunity of freeing all these captured superheroes and supervillains. But what we also see is that they only have a couple of the codes regarding how to access the prison system on Rikers Island, because again, at the moment, the only method for access to the Prison 42 complex is at Rikers Island. But part of the 50-state initiative includes having access to the negative zone prison from one major prison system in all 50 states. And of course, Captain America and his team are trying to keep this from happening. And so as we continue with the story, we of course see one of the interesting concepts when we see that Diamondback brings in a couple of supervillains. And what these supervillains tell Captain America is that the supervillain community has just as much, if not more, to fear from what's going on with this 50-state initiative than the superheroes do. The superheroes could choose to register. They could simply just make themselves a part of S.H.I.E.L.D., but the supervillains will most likely not have this same opportunity. But before either of these supervillains are able to actually join Captain America, they're immediately shot to death by Frank Castle with no questions asked. And so what Captain America does is he immediately attacks Frank Castle. And Frank Castle says that they were bad guys, that they were killers and they were thieves, and that again, his purpose, his goal is to eliminate all villains anywhere that he finds them, regardless of what their motives are. And so as Captain America continues pummeling Frank Castle, he tells Frank Castle to fight back, but Frank Castle says that he won't fight against Captain America. And so it's at this point that Captain America relinquishes his fighting against Frank Castle and simply tells somebody to take Frank Castle away, to get Frank Castle out of here. We see that, of course, that Spider-Man explains that the whole reason why Frank Castle wouldn't go or wouldn't fight Captain America is because Frank Castle believed that maybe he had enrolled or he had become part of the Vietnam War to basically walk the same path as Captain America did, to make himself equal to Captain America. And of course, Captain America says no. He says this is wrong, and he says that Frank Castle is simply just an insane human being. And so at this point, we transition to Stamford, Connecticut. And this is when we learn why it was that the entire superhuman Registration Act had been initiated in the first place. We see that Reed Richards and Tony Stark are meeting with Miriam, and I guess one of the mothers of the children who was killed during Stamford, Connecticut. And what Miriam tells us here is that it was her idea to launch, I guess, the Superhuman Registration Act, to get Tony Stark to launch the, I guess, the 50-state initiative, that she's basically the one who was behind all of this, that she was the mastermind. She was the reason why the bill went before Congress. She's the reason why Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and Hank Pym had sided with the bill. And so what this does is give us some very important insight into just how deep this whole Superhuman Registration Act goes. And from here we transition to the North Pole, to Doctor Strange's sanctuary. And Doctor Strange is visited by the Watcher. And the Watcher asks Doctor Strange how long he's been here, how long it's been since he has eaten. And Doctor Strange says basically since the beginning of the Civil War, that he really hasn't had anything to eat, and he's only drank a little bit of water. And the whole reason why he's done this is because the idea is that hopefully his fasting will allow the Civil War to come to an end with as little bloodshed as possible. But what Doctor Strange also tells us here is a very important thing. He tells us that there's no right or wrong in this debate, that neither side is correct here, that it's all just a matter of perspective. And this is one of the most hard-hitting points of the Civil War, in the sense that in the end, it all simply just comes down to how you view society, how you view the argument of freedom versus security. And so again, the Watcher says that he's very familiar with this concept, the idea of trying to stay out of things, and the recognition that sometimes there is no right decision here. There is no right way to decide who's right and who's wrong. And so from here, we transition to Riker's Island. And as we continue with this story, we of course see that the Invisible Woman is able to help the Secret Avengers enter Riker's Island when she was able to make them invisible. And so again, what Black Panther, who has joined the fray, says is that of course he and Storm were with the Secret Avengers the whole time. He had always sided with them, and that they'll do everything they can in order to ensure that the Secret Avengers come out on top here. But before the group goes too much further, of course, Spider-Man says that his spider sense is going absolutely haywire, that it's going completely nuts. And what we see is that on the other side of the door that they are facing, when it opens up, pours out the entire forces of Tony Stark, as well as the Thunderbolts. And so again, we basically have this confrontation. We have this situation where we have Captain America's team and Tony Stark's team beginning to face off with one another. From here, we see that Tony Stark says that they were aware of the actions of Captain America the entire time. They knew exactly what their plan was because they've had a mole within Captain America's Secret Avengers for quite a while. And Captain America says he knows who it is, that he knows it's Tigra, and they've known about her for quite some time. But he says that Tony Stark's not the only person that has a spy on the other side. And what's revealed to us here is that Hank Pym is not actually Hank Pym, that Hank Pym is Hulkling. He is a shapeshifter, and that he had replaced Hank Pym at the beginning of this story when we had picked up with Hank Pym and Maria Hill in Arizona. Now, what we can most likely derive from this is that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who had appeared to Hank Pym and told him there was a problem with one of the superheroes was in fact Hulkling in disguise. And once he was able to get Hank Pym by himself, he was able to overpower and incapacitate Hank Pym and then take his place. And Reed Richards realizes this is a massive problem, that if Hulkling was able to access or able to replace Hank Pym and able to copy the voice patterns of Hank Pym, then he's had full authority to everything that Reed Richards and Tony Stark has. And so what we realize is that all the cells are opening up inside of Prison 42, and all the prisoners who were previously being held captive have now been released. And so the forces are basically at an equal point now, where both teams have the same number of people and both teams are quite capable. And so as the story comes to an end, we see Captain America telling Tony Stark and Reed Richards to close their eyes, because this might hurt. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.